Okay, back and ready to talk about persuasion. Probably one of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to communication. So let's start just by like talking a little bit about this chapter, and we have a couple of videos to watch. And yeah, we'll talk about how we can utilize these ideas in your persuasive speeches, which are coming up after our toast and eulogy speeches. Now we've got a due date on the toast and eulogy speeches, right? So we'll get these housekeeping issues out of the way. You do not have to send me like the topic of your speech to get it approved for a toast and eulogy or eulogy, all right? Only if it's like something really weird, like if it's a eulogy to like someone that's not a person or like something that like isn't like typical, then I'll want an approval because I want you to take this assignment seriously. I don't want you to make it something satirical or anything like that. And the same with toasts too, right? But other than that, like there's no need for you to do that. When you are recording yourself, okay, we're gonna say this for all of them. I want you to have a wide enough angle that for the toast and eulogy, it doesn't matter that much because movement isn't a thing. But for later speeches, I want to be able to see like the whole room so that like if you're moving back and forth that like I can follow you and everything like that. If you have someone else film you, that's totally fine too. But like acknowledge that it might take more than one take for you to find the speech that you like. The more you practice, the less takes it'll take. So those are the heads up things there. The persuasive topics spreadsheet, I have been checking it. I checked it again today. Some of your topics, most of your topics have been approved so far. A couple where I'm like, this is okay, but I need like to know like a concrete action. Some of you are like trying to shoehorn a speech to convince in a speech to take action, to actuate behavior. And I don't want you to conflate them, all right? Even if your topic is something that you're like, I want people to think the way I do, like, that's not the assignment. The assignment is to get people to do something, right? To take a material action. So please, even if you want people to think the way that you do, right? I want it to culminate in some type of a material action for them to take in your call to action. If you do not do that, you are not getting the assignment correct, okay? Okay, so chapter opens up with these two ideas of like the speech to convince, which is to change someone's minds, to change their attitudes or beliefs or value, while a speech is speeches to actuate or to change someone's behavior, and that is what your assignment is. We also talk about propositions of fact, propositions of value, and propositions of policy, right? And it oddly they like use an abortion example in the book about that, but whatever. There's lots of ways that we can like deal with these propositions. Each of your persuasive speeches should be some type of a proposition of fact, value, or policy, and they shouldn't be propositions of fact, and they shouldn't be propositions of value. Yours should be a proposition of policy because you're trying to get your audience to do something, to enact something. Doesn't necessarily mean like it's a law in this case. It means that like you're not trying to get them to change their values. You're not trying to get them to agree with a particular fact. You're trying to get them to do something. You're trying to like say like this is the best course of action for you to take. So examples would be like a proposition of fact might be okay, like that a proposition of fact would be like Miguel Cabrera is the best baseball player of all time, right? That is a proposition of fact, right? I can like try and establish whether or not this is true or untrue. While a proposition of value would be like something that says like, um, uh, excuse me, that batting average is a good measure of the talent of a baseball player, right? And that's a proposition of value because you're deciding whether or not that's a good measure or not a good measure. Another proposition of value would be like, we believe that political incorrectness or political correctness does more harm than good in this world, right? Like that's a proposition of value because you're deciding what's good or bad, what's right or wrong. While a proposition of fact is like deciding what is true or untrue. And a proposition of policy is more like things that we should do. Like proposition of policy would say that we believe that like enacting a universal healthcare system is the best way to fight coronavirus, or that social distancing is something that should be mandated by the state. So like those would be propositions of policy because it's telling you something to do. Um, and like speeches can be divided or like propositions and persuasive ideas can be divided into like these different groups. This is definitely something that like comes on the exam as well, but it is also in your book. They talk about demographics again, which we've talked about before with audience analysis. I don't want to rehash all that stuff, but we do also have a whole section about receptive, neutral, and hostile audiences. All right, so I really need you to get your topics approved because I want to open up the discussion boards for your analysis, audience analysis, so that like everyone can like let you know a little ballpark of like how they feel about your topic. All right. We've talked about explicit instructions on how to do this earlier. I'll give more explicit instructions later, but first and foremost, get those topics approved. So a receptive audience, like is obviously an audience that like already primarily agrees with your topic, which is cool to a point, but like it means that there are certain things that you need to do in your speech and certain things that you don't need to do in your speech in order to win your persuasive appeal. A neutral audience may be neutral because they don't have much of an opinion on the subject, or they may be neutral because they might not be very informed on your subject. And a hostile audience or an unreceptive audience is one that like you're going into the speaking situation knowing that they're pretty much against you. So what do we do with these audiences that like what would we do differently in our speeches? All right, so like a receptive audience, you would not want to tell them things that they already know, right? So if you're giving a speech about climate change among your own demographic, you don't need to convince them that climate change exists or that climate change is like human caused or anthropogenic or whatever, right? Because most of the people in the audience in your generation are probably going to agree with you. They already know this. So like if you start telling them facts about climate and like temperature increases, they're just going to be bored because you're telling them a bunch of things that they already know. You're preaching to the choir. All right. The other thing that you want to do when you have a speech with a receptive audience is that you want to increase like what the call to action is. You can probably get them to do more, right? So everyone believes that there is everyone believes and knows these facts about climate change, right? But like if they all know about it, then like you have a much different task than like convincing them. You have to like the task is for you to find out like why aren't they doing something about it, right? Or why aren't they doing something about it to the point where we're solving the problem? Um, So rather than just say like, oh, turn off the lights when you leave a room or like go and recycle in order to fight climate change, odds are they're probably already doing that kind of thing. And like, that's not really a big deal. And that's like not a worthwhile speech to give, right? If they're all on board on climate change, you gotta be like, you need to join the sunrise movement or you need to get active and you need to go and like, not just write your politician, you need to join a protest group and like go and lobby and talk to them face to face, right? Because like if this is actually an issue that you find important, then you should be able to do more, right? A neutral audience might not be informed, and so you might have to do the types of explanations of like what climate change is, how it's caused, and things like that. And the call to action is going to be a little bit less. So like another example, the example that I used to give in class all the time, which you're not in class and that sucks. We would talk about student loans and I would divide up the classroom into like who has student loans and who doesn't, which remarkably Truman students have shockingly few student loans. I'm sitting here on $140,000 in student loans and y'all are like, I'm gonna leave debt free. you're crazy. But anyway, um, I grab all the people with the student loans and like I tell them like, hey, like we all have these like thousands and thousands of dollars in debt that like people are profiting off of our debt, right? Our education is like lining the pockets of someone who didn't even do anything. They just loaned out money and like we have to pay them in order to get an education. And that seems like it's probably wrong, right? So rather like if you are in a position where you have thousands of dollars that you're going to owe, I'm going to be able to like make that call much bigger. And I'm going to tell you right now that like all of us who like are set to like pay thousands of dollars, let's say like when are you going to graduate? Like probably like 2024. So let's say like July 4th, 2025. All right. That day, all of us stop paying our student loans. Not a single one of us pays student loans anymore after that day. It's going to be our Independence Day from student loans, our Independence Day from debt. And like that's the whole thing, right? Like if you are on board and you have like so much debt and nothing to lose, like that sounds like a great idea, right? Because like all those other people who don't have student loans, right, or the people who like decide that like they're gonna pay because they're scared or whatever, that's not your friend, right? That's your enemy, right? And so like the only way that this works is if all of us do this together. So solidarity is the way that we can fight and win on these student loans. Like people are doing rent strikes right now and things like that. This is the time, July 4th, 2025. All right, that's the day that we declare independence from all of our student loans. And what's the worst that they can do? If we all stop paying it at the same time, then like they can't do anything. Are they going to garnish all of our wages? Y'all are worried about being able to get a job when you get out of here. If we all stop and they decide to garnish all of our wages, that's going to be a massive logistical undertaking. So what that means is that every single person is going to get a job with the government to garnish wages. So it's a win-win. Like either you don't pay your student loans or you get a nice cushy government job that like has really good benefits. See, so like that's an example of like having a receptive audience that already knows how bad student loans are and saying like, hey, we can push a lot harder, right? But if for all of our other people who don't have student loans, maybe they're like non-committal, they don't really care that much, and so I might have to explain like why there is a huge problem with the student loan crisis, how it affects them is very important as well, right? Because like if they don't really have student loans, like what's in it for them? Why do they care? If you have to explain how like if people are massively in debt, then they're not going to spend money on consumer goods, and it would be a drag on the overall economy, right? And like instead of saying like to go on this big student loan strike, I might say that like maybe it would be more fair if our student loans that like people did not make money on interest for it, that they should all be interest free. And that way, like we don't have this moral conundrum of like people just profiting off of like our education. And it's a little bit less of a call so that those people could probably get on board a lot more easily, right? So like that's how you like think about like where your audience is to the type of call that you're going to make. How extreme, how far can you go? We're gonna have some more. There's another persuasive theory that's actually handy on this. I'm gonna like pull this thing up where it's at. Where's my share screen? Yeah, here we go. We're gonna share my screen and we're gonna share it with this. Okay. So this is what we call social judgment theory. This is a persuasive theory that talks about like where your audience is and the types of things that you can do in order to convince them to go somewhere, right? So you see like you have two different people, Muffy and Mort. I did not select these names. This came off of the internet, but it's a reflection of an actual theory. And they talk about the proposition is like, what should we do with murderers, right? And they say everything from like a reward, we should be like, yay, murder, which is obviously something that both of them are going to reject, to killing them through torture, which is also a bit too inhumane for Muffy and Mort, right? And like they're probably going to reject that as well. So you have like these spectrums of like where they reject and where they accept, right? But then you also have like this place called the latitude of acceptance, And what happens is like, you don't want to give a speech making your call to action inside a place that they already accept, right? Because like if they already accept that and you're making a call into something that they already believe, then like they're just going to assimilate that message of being like, you're just telling me something that I already believe. You want to get into that place called the latitude of non-commitment, which is right in between those two. Okay. Ordinarily, there's actually a latitude of commitment on the other side of the acceptance there too, on the other side of the spectrum. But for this one, they just put it on one side. That's fine. So they're saying like for Muffy, you could get Muffy to accept number 6, a life with life prison with a possibility of parole as an acceptable punishment for murderers. But even though right now they're saying like life without parole and the death penalty are probably the ideal things to do, right? Because it's in this place, it's like in between, then you could possibly like convince someone to move into that area. But if you go too far on either side, they're just going to reject your message out of hand. So it's like this idea of like persuasion being on this spectrum, right? And you want to hit that sweet spot in between latitude of rejection, in between the rejection and acceptance, right? Because if it's in the rejection, they're going to just tune out your message. If it's in the acceptance, they're just going to say, yeah, this is all what I already do. This is what I already know. Um, and like it's that latitude of non-commitment, which is the sweet spot that you want to get. Because if we're trying to change minds and change behaviors, we have to like get them in like a place where it's not too outlandish. The same type of thing works with like a gun control speech, right? Where some people are like the latitudes on the extremist part would be like no guns for anyone versus making everyone own a gun, like just mandating it. And like every place in between of like, okay, do we have like ban on assault weapons? Do we have background checks? Do we have registration? Do we have like um, increasing like elimination of registration to increase freedom? Do we have like do we have disarming the police? Like all kinds of different sections that we could put on this spectrum. And your audience analysis should try and gauge where exactly the audience is so that you can temper your call to action to a place where the audience is most likely to actually do something for your topic. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Lastly, we have that hostile audience, all right, the unreceptive audience. And this is really not a bad thing. Like if you find out your audience is not receptive to your topic, that's not bad at all. In fact, that can be really good because there's a good setting or a good there's a good way to introduce speeches that are with a hostile audience that are very like straightforward. Uh, Also, like if you have a hostile audience, then you know where your audience is. So like that's not bad either, right? Like I would say the receptive audience is sometimes the harder one because you know that they agree with you, but they're still not acting. So like you have to figure that out, right? That's like what Martin Luther King dealt with the letter to Birmingham jail. He said like it's not the people that are against me that confuse me. It's the white moderate who like says they're for me but doesn't do anything, right? Like that's hard. So the hostile audience is not bad at all. There's definitely like some things that you do to start off and introduce your speech in a hostile audience. You don't want to start off saying like, this is what I want to convince you of, right? Because then you've set it up as an adversarial type of thing, right? You want to acknowledge the differences that you have, right? You thank the audience for listening. You acknowledge the differences that you have and be like, look, I know that this speaking situation is going to like, we're going to have these differences, all right? But let's talk about the places where we agree and then we'll talk about the rest, right? And like that graciousness is an important part of like starting off with an audience that might be a little bit more unreceptive to your topic. So totally like I have a video for this because like it's a really good example of it. Pardon me because like it is political in nature. But like Bernie Sanders went during his 2016 campaign, went to Liberty University. I'm not sure how much you know about Liberty University, Liberty University is a very conservative Christian university. It is run by a guy named Jerry Falwell Jr. Jerry Falwell Jr., like his father, was the leader of what they called the moral majority. He used to fight against like pornography. Like there was an excellent movie called The People versus Larry Flint, which was about like the editor of Hustler magazine, which was a pornographic magazine, fighting against Jerry Falwell. And Falwell was a very influential political figure. So Liberty University has like very, very conservative standards for their students as well. They live by something called the Liberty Code, which is a code of behaviors on campus where the only acceptable type of contact between men and women on campus is hand holding. All right, like that's how hardcore they are. If you are caught drinking alcohol, even if you are of age, even if you are not on campus, you can get kicked out of the university. So that is the type of like thing. Like I had a friend from Liberty University who was talking about going to Wayne State University in Detroit for grad school. And she was concerned about living in Detroit. And I said, well, you know, it's just like any other city where like, you know, after a certain time of night, like you would like not be walking alone at night, you know, you would have someone else. And she was like, oh, we have a curfew at Liberty University, so we're never out at night. And I was just like, oh, right. So like, this is not a slam against anyone who's there. It's just a very different university. So Bernie Sanders, the socialist Jew, goes to speak there. All right. You see what I'm saying? Like, so very, very hostile audience. And now what you'll see here are like people cheering and things like that. But I'm going to show you places where it's like, oh, these people are like super hostile. All right. So I'm going to share the screen again. And we're going to take a look at just the first couple of minutes, because what's good about this is the way he introduces the speech, right? Because that's what makes this worthwhile. That's what makes this a good example.
President Falwell and David, thank you very much for inviting my wife Jane and me to be with you this morning. We appreciate the invitation very much.
Right off the bat, thank you very much for inviting me, right? The appreciation.
And let me start off by acknowledging what I think all of you already know, and that is the views that many here at Liberty University have, and I, on a number of important issues are very, very different.
Bam, right? Very next thing, acknowledge the differences between me and the audience, right? I'm gonna know that like, look, you're a conservative Christian school. I'm like the socialist Jew from Brooklyn. This is a bit different.
I believe in women's rights.
Look at these three people cheering. Look at the guys behind them. Like, boom, boom, boom. Look at this guy right over here, right? This is not a friendly audience. Even though you hear the cheering and things like that, this is not a friendly audience.
And the right of a woman to control her own body. I believe in gay rights and gay marriage. Those are my views, and it is no secret. But I came here today because I believe from the bottom of my heart that it is vitally important for those of us who hold different views to be able to engage in a civil discourse.
Going straight into things that like they would agree with, right? Civil discourse, like who's against that, right? Even if we have different views, it's really good to come together and have this conversation, right? This speech at Liberty University, this was a part of the convocation for that week or whatever. And when they do these, like this is like a required thing for them to go to. This is mandatory. So like when I'm saying like this is not a friendly audience. Like literally, this is not a friendly audience. Like even though they're young people and that's Bernie's demographic, like the fact that they're at Liberty University usually is a reflection upon like their political views as well. And like Liberty's not a bad school or anything like that. Like I said, I've had like multiple friends that have gone there, but like yeah, like it's a relatively captive audience. It is not a voluntary audience. Oh, she's not too pleased. He's just kind of like there, right? All the people in the back, they're all like, whatever.
Too often in our country, and I think both sides bear responsibility for us, there is too much shouting at each other. There is too much making fun of each other. Now, in my view, and I say this as somebody whose voice is hoarse because I have given dozens of speeches in the last few months, it is easy to go out and talk to people who agree with you. I was in Greensboro, North Carolina just last night. All right. We had 9,000 people out. Mostly they agreed with me. And tonight, we're going to be in Manassas and have thousands out, and they agree with me. That's not hard to do. And that's what politicians, by and large, do. We go out and we talk to people who agree with us. But it is harder, but not less important, for us to try and communicate with those who do not agree with us on every issue.
Right there, right? That's his thing. He's like saying like, look, it's easy to talk to a receptive audience, right? That's not a big deal, right? But like, I have to talk to hostile audiences too, right? And so like, that's super important with our civic lives, right? Like, I can block every person on Facebook and Twitter that doesn't agree with me and things like that. But then like, where's the place for persuasion then, right? Where's the place for where like sure, I curated my feed so it's all people that agree with me, but like I've eliminated the entire idea of a hostile audience to my hot takes, right? Or to like any other type of thing that I might be promoting. And so like it undermines the entire value of public rhetoric, which is a big part of like what we're doing with our persuasion. You're in public, you are giving a rhetorical speech on like how to persuade someone. If we just like shy away and be like, I only want to do the speech that has no resistance to it, like not the best like way for us to go about our civic lives, right? We have to be able to like bring people to us that might not be with us all the time, right? At least get to that area of non-commitment where we can push them over just a little bit. Okay. So that is one way. That is social judgment theory. All right. That's one way that we can try and persuade audiences. Another way is through what we call cognitive dissonance. All right. Cognitive dissonance is a theory that comes from psychology. But this is a good way to think about like with our audiences. Like sometimes like our behavior doesn't match what we know should be like what we believe, right? So like we might believe something, but our behavior doesn't match up with it. And then we experience a discomfort with it. It's called dissonance, right? Because we know what's right or wrong in our mind, but we're doing something that is different than that, right? So that dissonance will cause one of two things to happen. Either our behavior changes, right? Or our values change, right? What we believe changes. We see this a lot, like people, like the folks who will use this are like people who do ads for texting and driving. We're gonna watch this ad real quick, but like I want you to like ask yourself this question: Do I text and drive? All right, like answer it like honestly though, right? Have I texted and drove? A lot of hands probably would go up in class, right? But we know that that's probably a dangerous thing to do, right? And we like consider we see ads like this. Now this ad has some blood and things like that, but I think it was like shot by like some high schoolers and stuff. So the makeup job isn't like too totally gross and things like that. But I want to give you a heads up that it might be a violent looking image in this car crash. But they're trying to take advantage of this idea that like you probably text and drive, right? And so I want to change your behavior by poking that one spot, just hitting you with it and saying like, hey, like, you know, you shouldn't be doing this, all right? Okay, now this takes advantage of this idea of cognitive dissonance, right? Like, where it's like, hey, you know, you might have done this before, right? The we're almost there message, right? It looks really familiar. Like this might be something that you've done. They also engage in like ethos, pathos, and logos, all in the same ad, right? So the pathos is really out there. Like you can see that. That's really easy, right? But the ethos and the logos, though, where are those coming from? I'm not going to get an answer because it's online. So the logos is like the statistic at the end. They say like, what was the statistic? Uh, Going back. Yeah, texting and driving increases your risk of crashing by 25%. Where's the source? The Alberta Motor Association. Okay, so like that's your ethos, right? You have this citation from someone. That citation makes it more credible, right? And like the 25% more likely to like get into a car crash, right? That's a statistic. That's a logos. That's a reason why you should not text and drive, right? So all of those elements are present in this commercial. We've seen this ad before, right? Maybe not this particular one, but we've seen this sort of thing before. And they try and poke you and say, hey, stop texting and driving. You know you shouldn't. You know you could get in trouble on this. You know that you could get into a car crash or something like that. Does it work? I don't know, right? Like we can like certainly have focus groups and everything else to figure out like how effective these are, but like it's not like this is something that hasn't been used lots of times, right? You go into driver's ed and they show you like some horrific movie about people being irresponsible driving and like car crashes from drunk driving, right? So do people still drive drunk? Yeah, unfortunately they do, right? So um it's it's just an interesting thing to think about. Now, the original experiments on cognitive dissonance are really fascinating because in the original experiments, what they found, it wasn't that the behavior changed. Like what they did was like the opposite. They forced someone to do a behavior and they found out that their values changed afterwards. What they thought actually changed into something different. And it's a really fascinating experiment. So this video is going to show some of that with the original researcher named Festinger, but this isn't old video, right? The original experiments were done in like the 50s or 60s, and like these people have like beehive haircuts and stuff. And so like, please like just accept the fact that like this is old and it's a different time. But it's an interesting video to like see the actual experiments. So I'm gonna pull that up and we're gonna watch it. I need to share my screen again.
Doesn't end, however, when a decision has been made. The act of making a decision can trigger a flood of other processes. According to psychologist Leon Festinger, whenever we choose to do something that conflicts with our prior beliefs, feelings, or values, a state of cognitive dissonance is created in us. A tension between what we think and what we do. When this tension makes us uncomfortable enough, we're motivated to reduce it in a number of ways. We may change the way we think about the decision, or try to change how others think about it so that they can support our decision. Or we may change some aspect of our behavior so that our decision seems more in character with us. In other words, we try to reduce the dissonance between how we think we should act and how we actually act by changing one or the other. In the mid-50s, Leon Festinger and his colleague Merrill Carl-Smith conducted a classic experiment in which students were engaged in very boring tasks. Students were then given a request by one of Festinger's staff.
Okay, that's fine. Let me tell you now what we're actually studying here. It's the effect of preparatory mental set on performance. The rest of the subjects are prepared by being told that the experiment will be very interesting and enjoyable. In fact, lots of fun. Now I have a somewhat unusual request to make of you. The next subject is waiting right outside, but the fellow who ordinarily gives the spiel isn't here. I wonder if you could possibly take his place. As a matter of fact, we figure we'll be needing someone in the future, so I'd like to offer you a $20 retainer and have you remain on call for us. Would that be all right?
$20? That'd be fine. Half the students were randomly assigned to the group that received $20 for lying, and the experiment was fun. The other half were given only $1 for lying.
Dollar as a sort of a retainer and have you remain on call with us. Would that be all right with you?
Yes, that'll be all right.
The cognitive dissonance came from the knowledge that the experiment was in fact boring, and $1 was insufficient reward for lying. Many of the $1 subjects actually convinced themselves that the experiment was fun after they made their decision, to reduce the dissonance between their prior beliefs and their behavior. They came to believe a big lie for a small incentive.
A girlfriend of mine who participated in an experiment last week, and she said it was very tedious. Oh, I don't think that was the same experiment because this one wasn't boring at all. I didn't think so.
The $20 subjects, on the other hand, felt no dissonance because they felt comfortable in lying just for the money.
He said it was pretty miserable and that I should do everything I could to get out of it. Well, I think maybe your friend was wrong. Perhaps it's a different experiment because this is a lot of fun. It appeared to me as if it were a puzzle. We had to turn these knobs, and I tried to figure out what we were doing it for, but I really couldn't figure it out. I'm sure I'll have better luck.
Other theories might predict that the man who is paid most would have the highest motivation for enthusing over the dull task and would be most sold on it himself. Cognitive dissonance theory leads to an exactly opposite prediction. The man who is paid $20 knows that the task is dull, but he also knows that he had sufficient justification for saying that it wasn't. Did you enjoy working on the manual test?
Well, it really wasn't too enjoyable. In fact, it was rather boring.
How about the man who is paid $1? He knows the task is dull, but he has two discrepant thoughts. He also knows that he did not have sufficient justification for saying that it wasn't. For him, there is dissonance. Time after time, we have seen what follows. He reduces the dissonance by changing his opinion about the dullness of the task. Did you enjoy working on the manual test?
Yes, I enjoyed it.
Would you like to participate in such an experiment again?
Yes, I think I would like to.
Anytime there is insufficient reward, there will be dissonance. The general principle seems to be that people come to believe in and to love the things they have to suffer for.
By discovering how people actually behave and not how some theory says they ought to behave, psychology can provide guidelines to help us catch ourselves before we go astray, or redirect us once we do, if we follow them.
And that's that. So it's kind of an interesting little experiment that they did, right? And it explains a lot where it's like, oh, like if there's incentive to like do a behavior that you don't necessarily agree with, then like they're going to continue doing that behavior. But if that incentive is like doesn't exist, then like you can poke at them and like be like in your persuasive speech, be like, look, like you can change your mind, right? Or you can change your behavior, but you have to like poke them and be like, hey, if you know that what you're doing is wrong and you need to change your behavior, I'm going to make it easy for you to do that, right? I'm going to provide that avenue for you to change that behavior. We will resolve that dissonance that's within you, right? Like that's not what you would say outwardly, but that's kind of what you're doing for them. You're saying like, look, I'm going to make you uncomfortable. I'm going to like shake you and be like, look, you know you're doing this thing that's wrong, and then I'm going to give you a solution. It's going to solve this problem. It'll relieve your dissonance. It'll make you a much happier person, right? All right, moving on with my notes here. Ethos, pathos, logos. Obviously, you should know those. Also, the Toolman model. Oh my God, I was so happy. Like, this is one of the best things about this particular textbook is that it includes the Toolman model for arguments. All right, so like, Toolman model is like a response to models of argument that are about facts, right? So like before the Toolman model, you have syllogisms, okay? Syllogisms are like an argument with 3 parts, all right? The syllogism has a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. An example of a syllogism would be like all people are mortal. Socrates is a person, thus Socrates is mortal. If the major premise and minor premise are correct, then the conclusion will always be true. All right, but this guy, it's a form of deductive reasoning, right? So in that sense, it finds facts. Inductive reasoning. So deductive goes from like the broad to the narrow to find facts. Inductive reasoning goes from examples to create a broad conclusion, right? So inductive reasoning is not a yes/no factual thing. It deals in probabilities. So like sun goes up today, sun goes up yesterday, sun went up the day before that, sun went up every day like since I was born. So through all of those examples, I can conclude that the sun will probably go up tomorrow. Can I be 100% sure that the sun will go up tomorrow? No, I cannot, right? Because like there's no like theories or anything that I'm dealing with or like premises that I'm dealing with. I only have the examples that were behind me in order to show something in front of me. So that's inductive reasoning. That's different. The Toolman model is like somewhat inductive in that like it relies on certain examples and data and backing, right? The reason why Toolman's so useful is because while all the philosophy folks are being like, oh, we're going to use another syllogism and we're going to find out what's true and untrue, what we found is like when we argue day to day, when we're arguing with like our friends and we're arguing with like strangers on the internet, or we're arguing with like people on the bus or whatever, we're not arguing about things that are like propositions of fact all the time that we can like find like what's true or untrue. We're not arguing because of like something with logic. We're only arguing about things that we're uncertain about. And that happens way more often, right? Way more often that we argue, we're arguing about things that are subjective or like have high levels of uncertainty that we can never truly know the answer to. For example, the day-to-day argument, right? Where are we going to go to eat tonight? Right? This is what I always think about. Like, are we going to go to Dairy Queen, or are we going to go to Take Root Cafe? Right? So can have arguments as to like, take food cafe is really delicious and it's all like locally sourced, and so it does good for the community, so we should go there. Well, on the other end, I could be like, well, Dairy Queen's cheap and I can get a Blizzard, right? So like we should go there because like Blizzards are good. So uh, Toolman tries to like break down these arguments to at least like diagram them and show them in all of its in all of its component parts, and it takes into account the fact that like it's not going to be about true or untrue. It's about like, if I break this argument down in its component parts, I can see how strong or weak that argument is. Like maybe it's missing an element of like the model. And if it's missing an element of the model, then maybe that argument has a weakness for it, right? So they talk about like the parts in the Toolman model, which are like the claim, right? The claim is the thing that you are like trying to say, right? It's the thing that you're trying to prove. The data, which is something that is going on that is leading you to the claim, and the warrant, which connects the data to the claim, right? It puts the claim it puts the data in motion, right? They have an argument in there about like, I don't even remember. It was like people should eat better food, right? And like the data was that like there's a high level of obesity, and like the data was something along the lines of like, the types of diets that we have right now are very calorie rich, and like it's causing, and like that is a cause of obesity. And then below that they have backing, which is like the type of like research or evidence of some type that would be of reason that supplements the argument, right? So you should know those component parts. In rhetoric and civic life, we talk about that a lot more. In or argumentation, or in oral advocacy and debate, which I'm teaching next semester, we'll talk about that a lot more. And in the argumentation class, which is the upper division communication class, we'll talk about the Toolman model as well as the weaknesses in the Toolman model too. But for right now, Toolman model, pretty awesome, right? Definitely something that you're going to want to know. Yeah, the last thing is like the item that they have. Oh, not the last thing. We've got a few things. They talk about the ethics of persuasion as well, all right? And they talk about logical fallacies, all right? I don't like to spend a lot of time on logical fallacies because I think they're kind of overused. Not that like the fallacies themselves are overused, but people calling out logical fallacies is a bit overdone. So I wanted you to take away a couple of things. Like first and foremost, the big thing that I do not want you to ever forget is like, just because a logical fallacy was used does not mean a claim is untrue. I'm going to say this again. Just because a logical fallacy is used does not mean a claim is untrue. Does it mean that like there's not sufficient evidence to prove a claim to be true? Yes, right? But it does not mean that a claim is untrue at all, okay? Like the reason why this is important is because like, even though logical fallacies might be somewhat unethical, right? Or they're just not a valid way of showing an argument, it's very much a part of our rhetoric and discourse. Like Cicero, the ancient Roman orator Cicero, considered one of the best orators in Roman politics, would easily use lots of like ad hominems in his speeches, which is a logical fallacy, right? And he would insult Caesar in his speeches, still considered an amazingly good orator, right? So like, is it a little unethical to like use ad hominems? Sure, but does it happen? Absolutely. And we shouldn't like just like think like these things like shouldn't happen ever. They just do, right? And sometimes like this is a part of like our civic argument. Like it just happens. Like absolutely, Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are all going to call each other names and things like that, right? And they're all going to like go in on each other. Like that's a part of it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's untrue. And the second thing is that a lot of logical fallacies are just incredibly mischaracterized. So if you like straw person, right? Like they're like, that's a straw person, right? Or that's a straw man, right? That's often used to just dismiss someone's argument out of hand. But most of the time, people don't really know what that fallacy even means. So they just say it and then walk off like they just won a prize or something. So don't do that unless, like, even if you know what an argument, what the fallacy means, like, never just like say that this is a logical fallacy and just pretend like the argument just ended. That's not how the real world works. Okay, so like, and often like even like the other one that is a big one is like appeal to authority is often used as like some type of a logical fallacy all the time. But like appeal to authority is only fallacious if you are appealing to a person who is not actually an authority on that subject. All right. If you use like Craig Hennigan like as an authority on argument, then like that makes sense because like I've been a debate coach for years. I've like studied argument. It's like my area of my PhD. So yeah, like an appeal to authority for a person who is an expert in the field, like that makes sense, right? But if you use like a climatologist as an appeal to authority, as to like, well, you know, the climatologist says that like we should go eat at Taco Bell tonight. Well, like that is where it becomes fallacious, is because like just because some super smart person in climate like likes Taco Bell doesn't necessarily mean that everyone should have Taco Bell, right? It doesn't. That's where the appeal to authority like doesn't work. Is when you appeal to an authority who isn't an authority on a certain issue. There's an excellent video of Bill Nye, the science guy, talking about philosophy, and he like totally rakes philosophy over the coals. So, but the problem is, Bill Nye isn't a philosopher. So like he has absolutely no authority on this subject, and yet someone was like, "Oh, we need to know like what Bill Nye thinks about philosophy," which is like, well, I mean, like not a good authority on this subject, right? So yeah, like often like these ideas of like someone calling out logical fallacy is very overused, and it never ever like really ends an argument. It doesn't mean that something isn't true just because they used a fallacy. It just means that like their evidence behind it is probably a little bit like needs some work. um Lastly, they talk about organization and they put in Monroe's motivated sequence in the chapter. This is a really common organization style, and you could certainly use that for your persuasive speech outlines. So you definitely want to like try and go over that and check it out because you might want to use it for your final speech. Um, yeah, and I think that's all what we've got today. What do you think, Toby? Is that enough? Shall we like say hi real quick? Say hi, Toby. Or have you been sleeping the whole time? Look at you. Get you. Worst student assistant ever. That's right. All right. So get your persuasive topics in and get ready for your toast and eulogy speeches. Make sure that you're ready to film them and things like that. I'll have like written instructions on how we should save and like share those films so that like I can see them and grade them and everything like that. Okay. And I'll look for that probably sometime next week. All right. And that's it for today.